We saw that even with a completed successfully message at the end of a log file, we might have issues and missing records. So what can we do? Well, we can compare the rows exported with the rows imported from the log file. Or we can do a row count on source and target for each table and compare the output. We can check if we migrated all objects. And we can compare the data, the content of each table. Let's check how we can compare rows. For comparing rows from the export and import log file, we can use the Unix commands grep and awk. From the log file with the missing rows, let's extract with grep and awk the lines containing how many rows it handled, here marked in red. By the way, for those using Windows, you can use batch or PowerShell and batch processing commands to do something similar. If you prefer to use Unix syntax on your Windows, you can use the Windows subsystem for Linux or Cygwin. As the order in the data pump log files between source and target might be different, we need to sort the output. And finally, use diff to get the differences. Do not forget to do that for all data pump log files on export and import side. Zero downtime migration with logical online migrations. First, what does ZDM logical migration mean? At the beginning, it uses export data pump and import data pump. So here we can use the previous method to validate the amount of records. But it isn't really helpful because after the initial load with data pump, Golden Gate will sync the source and target database. How can I do a row count in this environment then? Let me share a simplified example. We can spool row counts on source and target for each user and each table. To do so, we need to check out DBA tables and get a list of all table names for all users we migrated. By the way, in your Oracle releases, DBA user tables has a column called Oracle maintained, which helps you to exclude Oracle internal users. When we concatenate the DBA tables query with some strings, a select statement, probably a parallel hint, as we might have big tables, table name, owner, and the count statement, we end up with a complete select statement. Spooling now this output gives us a SQL file containing all the select count statements for all user tables in this database. For thousands of rows in this output file, we can even split that file again into chunks, and finally execute the chunks in parallel on source and target. Executing now the SQL containing all select statements for all user tables will run for a while, and finally writing the content into a log file which contains the owner, the table name, and how many rows it contains. You can now use again sort on source and target and diff to compare the output. What can we do to validate and compare objects? How can we validate objects? Well, we can check if they are valid or invalid, and if we have more or less invalid objects on target. And we can check if we have the same amount of a certain object type on source and target. Let's start with the invalid objects. There are several reasons why invalid objects can happen during an import. Everybody might have come across invalid objects before and knows how to recompile them using utlrp. Or you can use the parallel recompile, utlprp, and the number of parallel jobs, n. We should also check if there are more invalid objects on the target database compared to source. A simple statement we can use is select invalid objects of target database minus the invalid objects of source. To create an individual recompile statement for each invalid object on the target database, which has a valid equivalent on source, we can combine the last statement, the select invalid object on target minus the invalid object on source, adding some SQL commands like in the example here, the alt-view compile, and we end up with complete recompile statement that we can execute. If you like, you can also collect the detailed error code from the DBA error table. This is helpful just in case the recompile fails again. Here the output of the previous select statement, containing the recompile statement for an invalid view and selecting also from DBA errors, returning the reason why the recompile might have failed again. Using this select target minus select source object query, we can do all sorts of comparisons. For example, comparing also constraints. We can even use this expensive query to compare content. When comparing content, we have to execute the query in both directions. Select source minus target and select target minus source.